How are you doing, Dave? You okay?
Yeah, I'm doing fine, thanks, Alex.
Thanks very much for joining LSC Sharetalk today on a Bank Holiday Monday.
I know that's a pleasure. It's good to actually have a couple of days off for a change.
You must do some mileage, that's for sure.
Too many miles. Everyone thinks it's all fun doing all that travel, but you spend a lot of time away from your family, and it sort of takes its toll sometimes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't. Just to kick off the interview, would it be possible if you could maybe comment on Horse Hill, why you got involved originally, and what you think about the future holds?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back a while. I remember when Jonathan Tidswell, who was Angus Energy, came and saw me some time ago and said he's looking for some money to try and drill a well near Gatwick Airport. And I said, "You must be joking." I said, "How far near Gatwick Airport?" And he said, 1.2 miles from Gatwick North Terminal. I said, "Well, no one's been allowed to drill a well down there without massive sort of protests and all the issues that come with it." So I said, "All right, let's go out and have a look." And sure enough, he flew in from Scotland, and I caught the train out, and it was 1.2 miles from the GPS from Gatwick Airport. And I said, "Have you got permission to drill this well?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I go, "Awesome. Let's see if we can raise the funds to do it." And obviously the whole thing started off principally with UKOG, but these things were investment companies, and we needed to find a number of companies to drill it. And it was a bit like cat in a hot tin roof while we were drilling the well, because the independent people had put some fairly big numbers on the oil and potentially the lower Triassic gas. And I was pretty relieved when we hit oil shows at the Portland, and then got a lot more oil shows as we were drilling further down, which took a long time to interpret and evaluate. But the results of the last couple of weeks have been nothing short of outstanding. And as Steve Sanderson says, it's the biggest onshore oil hit in the UK's history onshore. And from what I gather, there was a lot more upside on that, particularly in places like the Portland and the lower Kimberley limestones. So we're all on the days for sidetracks and further wells. And this has the potential to make a big difference to the UK's economy. I think the fact that these things flowed so much oil has surprised everybody, even the academics. And I certainly know those people at number 10 and number 11 Downing Street are very interested. So it's been a good success. But just reading all the chatter last week, people going, "Oh, the game's over. We've hit the oil. There's nothing further to report." But I think this is just the beginning of the journey. So traders trade, and long-term shareholders are the ones that reap rewards. So let's see who sticks.
Yeah, it's definitely we've been covering Horse Hill for quite a while now, and I think now they've reevaluated the well. It's looking quite exciting, really.
Well, it's not reevaluated the well. I mean, the world was waiting to see if this thing actually flowed. I mean, I was pretty comfortable that the Portland would flow, and I was sort of hopeful for 150 to 200 barrels a day. But the real surprise was these limestones, which are ubiquitous around the whole Wheel Basin. From the work that we've done, indicates that there's a lot of recoverable oil now in limestones underneath the Wheel Basin. So it's going to be a big project, and it really all started off with Horse Hill. And people don't understand also that there's been a lot of wells drilled into the Kimberley over the last 40 to 50 years, but no one ever analysed for the oil down there. So UKOG and those who have been working on the project for some time have got a pretty good idea, where the oil sits, elsewhere in the basin, and it's quite vast.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a story worth watching for the future. And what you've said in the past as well, I must admit, once they come back with the new data on the well, I think maybe sorry.
Yeah, there's new data on the well. Plus, I think a lot of the academics who sort of poo-pooed the whole concept of Horse Hill and the fact that there would be flowable oil down in those Kimberley limestones, are starting to change their views and rhetoric on the place. And hopefully the momentum starts moving with the fact that UKOG and its partners have found something quite significant for the UK.
But this all takes time, and in a pretty horrible market, particularly on the AIM perspective, AIM market perspective, and a fairly depressed oil price. I think UKOG sort of held up pretty well. There's been good volume in the stock, and a lot of interest. So, and it's good to see the newspapers starting to change their rhetoric as well about the prospectivity of the oil potential from Gatwick beyond.
I picked up on UKOG as well when I think it was 6% they got into the operators, Angus. So that was a quite good business.
That was a while ago. But the whole idea of getting involved in that whole play was there was always going to be in our mind a play for the greater Weald, and UKOG, particularly when I was chairman, was active as possible in getting as much acreage or interest in acreage within the Weald Basin and the Isle of Wight that we could get at the time.
Yeah.
So, and there were some good deals there that were done, to pick up some of those percentages in some of the other licenses in the Weald that UKOG now have in its portfolio have been, outstanding deals. And I think in time will be proven to be, even better outstanding deals when the value of the oil underneath those licenses, particularly in the Kimberich and the Oxford and the Liassic, sort of come to bear. But the other thing that people haven't sort of really clocked on this Horse Hill well is that there was only limited time from a testing perspective, and there is a lot more testing that can be done in the lower units and around the Oxford and the Liassic that haven't even been tested yet. So the fact that we've got flowable oil in the UK in these Kimberich limestones, and these are vast, 1,000 square kilometres of the stuff, all goes really well for further oil potential down in the Oxford and the Liassic.
Definitely, a lot of people forget how Witch Farm first started off and how that came about. And that only flowed 600 something barrels originally, where you've got Horse Hill.
Yeah, I mean, Discovery Well, I think it's 120 barrels a day. That's right.
Yeah, it's definitely something worth touch. Can I just touch on Lenigas Cuba, if that's okay?
Yeah, of course you can.
Why did you start that company, Dave, please?
Pardon?
I'm saying, why did you start this company? What gave you the idea? Why?
Well, Sanderson, who's the CEO and chairman of UKOG, and I were sitting there talking about sort of, what sort of plays globally could, really change the world with respect to new oil potential. And it was Sanderson that said, look, Dave, go to Cuba. There's some 800-pound gorillas and big elephants down there. And we did a lot of work on the potential of Cuba, and then, reviewed where we could get into the oil space. And it was really all about Block 9, which is, one of the big blocks onshore Cuba. And at that stage, MEO Australia and PetroAustralis had penned a deal with QPET, but it hadn't been approved by the ministry. And, the whole genesis of Lenigas Cuba is really all about us getting involved in the oil and gas sector down there. And, stretching back to the Longrow days a bit, when you move into a country the size of Cuba that is crying out for foreign investment, you look for what other areas of investment can you do. And really what I decided to do was to set up a mini conglomerate for Cuba, focusing on multi-strategy type investments. Some are cash flow generative, some have got phenomenal growth potential. The oil and gas side where we started there, we want more and more of it. And on 3rd of September, I think it was, the ministry approved Block 9. And from our perspective, that's phenomenal. And the news coming out of MEO Australia in the last couple of weeks, there are some very, very, very large targets on Block 9, right adjacent to some of the biggest oil blocks and producing blocks onshore Cuba. So, there's a lot of potential there. And since being involved in setting the business up, we're now involved in the tourism and travel side. Toby Brocklehurst's Travel Welcome in Cloud 9 is going from strength to strength to strength. There's been a lot of rhetoric from the Americans about opening up travel into Cuba. We are seeing the Americans come. We're also seeing the Chinese come, and we expect to
the Cloud9 travel welcome business to be a multi-million-dollar turnover business plus, before the end of this year. And from what I'm seeing, the business is doing exactly what it says on the tin. And, the growth potential of Cloud9 and travel welcome in the next couple of years should be phenomenal. And, and as you start getting involved in businesses that have already been registered in Cuba for so many years, you find others that have been starved for working capital, because what people don't understand in Cuba is you can't get a bank loan. Oh. And look, it's impossible. There is no such thing as a banking system that you can walk into a bank and get a bank loan to build your business or enhance your businesses. So really what we've been trying to focus on is getting involved with entrepreneurs that have been well established there, well respected by the government, are doing a great job for encouraging people to do business with Cuba as opposed to, some other sort of generic investment with respect to Cuba. And we really focus on internal Cuban investment and things that really help the Cuban economy. And since then, we're bought into Cuban Professionals, which has been established in Cuba now for 5 to 6 years, which effectively is a labour hire business for Cuban artists and professionals all over the world, through cruise ships, through circuses, dance groups, and culture in Cuba is really quite special over there. It's got quite a broad mandate. So we're bought into the labour hire business, the consulting business, travel, tourism sector, all of which are expected to grow significantly in the next few years. Oil and gas, which I see as the really, really big one for us. And we're looking at some pretty strong initiatives with the Russian group on some of their specialty stuff, but I can't comment on that too much.
Yeah.
Because we haven't finalised it all yet. But I see Lenigas Cuba being a very big company within the next year or two.
It's me and you chatted before this, and like you said, the logistics and the politics to actually get involved in that country are immense for an outside country.
Well, I've seen so many people coming to Cuba, and I've been to Cuba a lot in the last sort of 6 to 7 months, thinking you can move into Cuba, drive in, fly in, and say, I want to set up a business here. I've seen it with so many corporates, and that's large or small. Most of their people sit in the hotel room, because what people don't understand is that to get a representative registered legal office in Cuba, it's a 3 to 4 year process by law. I mean, once you find out how to get involved in getting involved in Cuba and what you actually want to do, then you start the registration process, and that is by law a minimum 3 year process. So the whole world's going, I want to go to Cuba, but it's almost impossible. And that's why what our main focus has been is partnering with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial businesses that have been well established in Cuba that were just starving for working capital. And there's a number of other initiatives we're looking at over the course of the next 3 to 9 months, which also empowers local entrepreneurs to expand their businesses because they've been starved with working capital. So, there's a lot of rhetoric around, we're all heading off to America and down to Cuba, and Obama there last week, and it is good we're seeing the Americans re-engage with Cuba. But Cuba will grow at the pace that the Cuban government wanted to grow. And I remember one speech from one of the very senior Cuban politicians in the last few weeks is, Cuba has active trading relationships with 75 countries around the world. If America would lift the embargo, then they're very happy to have them as the 76th. But just because the Americans want things to change doesn't mean the Cubans want them to change the American way. And Cuba has a very unique way of building its own, appetite for growth and the destiny of its growth. So we're just pleased to be part of that. Yeah. And we see some tremendous explosive growth there, not only for us, but other people who are actively participating in Cuba.
Definitely.
And hopefully it'll reflect share price.
Yeah, well, you look to be in a good position, and it's just that the listing at the moment where Lenigas Cuba is, obviously, if that opens up a bit for investors, then hopefully that will change.
Look, I've been criticised a fair bit in the last couple of months about why I listed on ISDX, and we looked at a number of listing platforms within the UK. And bearing in mind, it was important for us to show the Cuban government that we had a listing that was regulated, so the company was fully transparent and fully open with its businesses. And to that extent, we wanted to list on the platform as soon as possible. Now, ISDX wasn't ideal at the time. If we were looking at AIM, and we looked at AIM, we looked at the standard list on the main board on the London Stock Exchange, and those platforms really didn't suit for growth for a company that was expanding rapidly in the investment scene. So, if we pursued the concept of listing on the main board, every time I considered buying a coffee shop for $50,000 in Havana, I would have been suspended to do a £400,000 to £500,000 reverse because I'd bought a business.
Yeah.
And if you look at AIM, you've got the 5 class test rules. You're not allowed to buy anything bigger than yourself. You're not allowed to buy anything with revenue. And really, it didn't fit for the way Cuba works with respect to what deals were available. And ISDX, from a rules perspective, the class tests rules principally don't apply. Every other rule that AIM works on sits within the ISDX rule book. And that for us was a platform that said, okay, we can be listed, we can be regulated, and we want to demonstrate to the Cuban government, who we have good relationships with in many departments, that we are one of the few, and I think we are the only public listed company completely dedicated to Cuban investment. And it was pretty important that we did that as soon as possible. And therefore we chose the ISDX route as our initial listing. Now that will probably change. I've mentioned in a previous release that we're looking at dual listing on a number of other exchanges.
Okay.
Cuba has its issues with respect to banking and other exchanges, and we're actively working through that process. So, hopefully we'll get some joy with other dual listings. But I'd like to see ISDX start to perform. And, speaking to the ISDX bosses, they are working very hard to get an online trading platform, which makes them comparable to AIM and the LSE with respect to people being able to trade online, securities on ISDX. I hear it's not far away. And that could really spark up some interest, because then, whether we like the chat boards or not, it'll allow platforms for chat boards to get going. It'll allow people to start trading, online from their computers. And isn't it interesting? I don't know how to trade online. I've never had an online trading account. If I want to put an order in, I have to call my broker and relate to the broker with respect to what works and what doesn't. So, I'm hopeful that we do get some activity on ISDX and the company can start actively trading. Now, I understand there's a fair amount of interest in the stock in the next week or two, particularly with Obama there and people sort of freeing up funds to look at buying or selling shares in Lenigas Cuba. So hopefully we can see the platform ISDX as it is start trading a lot more volume with a lot more interest over the course of the next week or two before the whole online trading system goes live with ISDX.
All right, that'll definitely be a game changer. That.
Can you still see your screen?
I can see you. Sometimes it's a little bit in and out, but I can see you perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
No problem.
Okay.
So the next one, if you don't mind, I see you on Twitter talking about LGO and about the company. As a private investor, can you comment?
Yeah, LGO Energy. Well, it's an interesting one. Originally it was called Lenigas and Oil PLC, and when I stepped down, circa 2 years ago, the board decided to change the name to LGO Energy. No problem with that.
Yeah.
As part of the deal, I got the name back for $1 after 6 months, which I have. Not that I intend to use it yet. Maybe I might rename LGO Energy Lenigas and Oil again, but I don't think so. But look, what people fail to understand, and I've been a long-term active shareholder of this company, even though some of the bloggers said that I'd sold all my shares and sold the company up the Swanee to find to their detriment that I still actually owned as many shares, if not a few more than I originally did.
Yeah.
The company has massive assets. I mean, oil in place in Gudron is 800 and something million barrels in a number of very simple conventional sandstones in a producing field. It has P1, P2, P3 reserves of nearly 24 million barrels. And the more wells that are drilled, that reserve number will continue to rise. They got stuck as a company when a $1.5 million piece of logging tool got stuck in a well because a driller pulled the lever at the wrong time in the wrong direction. Doesn't mean the assets aren't there. But what that did was that triggered a breach of the covenants for the $5 million that they had sitting in security against an $11 million loan.
Okay.
And maybe the board was a little bit hasty in putting themselves into a strategic review period, which brought in the takeover panel.
Yeah.
Maybe they shouldn't have. Maybe they should have just said, okay, let's ride out the system. So I've been watching, the goings on at LGO Energy for quite some time. And then when the board decided to come out of the strategic review period, I went and saw Neil and some of the rest of the board and said, guys, what are your main issues here? And the real main issue is you've got to get the bank square. So there was a financing announced last week, or the week before, I can't remember, which I participated, and the bank will be square again. Okay, they still owe the bank some money, but they're now into, I'm now a good client and I'm paying my bills as they're due type scenario. The other aspect I said to Neil and the board was, guys, you've got to get moving back on getting production back up. And okay, the bank's been very difficult with respect to releasing funds because you've breached your covenants, but get up to date with the bank and get things moving. There's a rig on site. The bank was being very difficult with respect to freeing up funds to even bring on, wells that had gone off because of breakdowns during this last 3-4 months. So, I've been working with Neil and the guys and said, okay, let's get some money from the troops to get the bank squared and get production growing as quickly as possible. And I understand what Neil and the team were doing by drilling these deep holes down to the Gudron sea sands. And the sad part about that lost tool was it was in the best well that's ever been drilled in the field. And I'm sure if on the last run when the tool was supposed to come out of the hole that it did, I don't think LGO would ever be sitting here looking at these sorts of problems because that well would be flowing multiple hundreds of barrels a day even today. So the key thing is the assets are there, the company's a producer, the company says its operating costs are circa $20 a barrel. Last week they announced a deal with the fact that Petrotrin, which is the government arm, from the oil ministry's perspective, has significantly reduced the royalty rates going to the government, which only means there's even more margin to get the field up and going and back on the trajectory to doing the thousands of barrels a day it should be doing today. So I'm positive. I'm a big shareholder. I've taken more shares in the placing. I've also taken more shares in the subject to EGM. I'm not going to tell you how many that is.
Okay, yeah.
But I can tell you quite a lot. And I've got an appetite for even more stock. And, Neil should be releasing quite a lot of upgrade to the field data by way of news releases over the next few weeks because they will be material events. And, I'd like to see the second rig on site as soon as possible. And I think from my experience in that Gudron field, to have 2 rigs on site really gets production moving. To sit there with one really maintains current production levels, but you need one maintaining existing production and the second rig totally dedicated to increasing production. So I'm really excited about where LGO is going. And as you and I were talking earlier, there's been quite a few, well, not quite a few, but a number of bloggers out there in Bloggerville going, this company's worth zero, it's completely stuffed. And I'm just sitting there going, wow, they've tried to push this price down to almost zero, which meant that myself and a few others who invested in this company now
are basically buying back into this company with the assets being bigger at an even cheaper price because the bloggers managed to scare and spook all the retail investors for their own agenda. So I'm just sitting there going, well, I think at the end of the day, I'm the one who's going to have the last laugh. And, you know, and as I've said to Neil and I've said publicly, I will financially support LGO as much as possible over these coming months to get its trajectory back in the right direction. And I'm a long-term shareholder in this company, have been since the day it floated, and, you know, I've got appetite for more shares. And I just think, you know, with the oil price finally heading north again, and you've got the Saudis talking, you know, a meeting on the 16th or 17th where they want a $50 floor price with the rest of the OPEC members, depends what Iran wants to do. My personal feeling is I think you're going to see oil gradually recover during the year, and that means even more positive cash flow for LGO from Gudron, which means that they can get cracking on as many of those 20 approved shallow wells that they've got from Petrotrin. And each one of those wells should be 50, 60, 80, 100 barrels a day. And, you know, those wells can be drilled, literally drilled, cased, completed and online within 2 to 2.5 weeks for less than $500,000 each.
Good grief.
And now you're into a situation where you're talking very, very large assets that are now coming back online. And I'm just pleased to see that the bank is being made whole. And, you know, it's time to get on with production. And, you know, frankly, I'd like to rejoin the board. I've had some thoughts that, you know, I've been in it for a while. It's got my name on the plaque. And, you know, maybe there's a situation I can join the board to give the guys a hand.
Okay, by the way, thanks very much for that one, Dave. Just the next one. You're one of the few CEOs who uses social media, i.e., Instagram. You've got your own website. You seem to understand social media, where a lot of CEOs don't.
Well, social media is a two-edged sword. You know, Instagram's not really social media; it's a place for people to share pictures.
Yeah.
You know, some months ago, I did set up my new, my 2 cents worth blog, davidlenigas.com, which I try and write informative articles about things that interest me, not necessarily pushing my agenda, but I talk about other things as well. That's becoming very well read. I mean, the last time I looked, my blog is now being read in over 100 countries around the world. And a lot of people are reading it these days. But, you know, I cover lots of topics on things that interest me. I suppose my main access to social media is really through Twitter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did make some mistakes in the early days, and I think I've learned what you can and can't say and when you can say things on Twitter that don't contravene or even consider going close to contravening rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a lot to manage it. And my view is, as a company chairman stroke CEO type person in a public place, it's my job to use as many forms of communication to my shareholders in the world what my companies do. And, you know, people use newspapers, people use news releases, people use radio, and, you know, there's no reason why people can't use Twitter. And, you know, if you look at the experience in the United States, quite a lot of CEOs are now putting together Twitter campaigns to send out proper company messages about what they're doing with respect to growing their company and the issues that their companies come up with from time to time. So I make absolutely no apologies for using Twitter. There are some CEOs that I'm reading who sort of step right over the mark on what they say with respect to their Twitter accounts. And, you know, I think you know, regulators will certainly be taking some to task.
Definitely, yeah.
But yeah, I think it's the new medium for people, for executives to communicate with people who are interested in what they're doing. So, and yeah, in 2 years' time, there'll be another social media site that's more relevant than Twitter. But I think people in our position have to learn and adapt on the ways that people communicate with the world these days. It's like newspapers. I mean, most newspapers don't print newspaper anymore.
Yeah.
They're online.
It's true.
Most newspapers are going broke. So you still need to be able to get your message out there.
Well, just look at the independent newspaper. That's just ceased printing now. So that's a prime example of the situation.
That's exactly right. I mean, you look at the Mail. I mean, the Mail is one of the biggest internet sites in the world now.
Yeah, that's
Mail on.
Yeah.
Its printership is going down.
Yeah.
Quickly. People are switching online, and it doesn't mean you switch online to read their views either. I mean, just because you're a journalist at the Mail, the Telegraph, or the Times doesn't mean that your word is gospel. I mean, journalists, from my experience, very rarely do research. They basically Google search and try and write what other people have written.
Yeah, just paste.
So I just think it's an important tool that CEOs use social media in the right, proper forum. But the problem with that is you attract trolls and anarchists who just want to make themselves feel important because they're sitting there, late at night drinking a bottle of whatever, working out who the hell they're going to give some sort of hard time to, whether it's a CEO or a Hollywood celebrity or whatever.
I know it's
but being on social media opens yourself up to open public criticism, and sometimes you take it pretty hardly, and I do, but I think I'm getting quite a thick skin to it now. Because at the end of the day, they have their own agendas, but I think my agenda is for the long-term growth of the companies that I'm associated with, and employing lots of people and trying to do very interesting things. And so long as I don't say anything out of school, I think I'm playing in a level playing field.
I would agree. What I've noticed about Twitter lately, there's a lot of accounts being locked up because I think compliance teams are actually looking now at Twitter to see what people are saying. So they don't realise how close to the wind they get with the comments, some of these people, normal people.
Yeah, a lot of those lock-up accounts that I'm sort of reading, when I research what's happening in social media, is because some of it's pretty abusive stuff.
Yeah.
To general Joe public and media stars and just normal people going about their day life. And they sit there being barraged by these weird guys that sit there in the middle of the night, with the lights out, trying to work out whose life they want to make a misery. And, that's why the report button sits on Twitter and so many other social media platforms, so people can actually report people who cause stress to other people. And it's becoming a crime now, a proper crime.
It is, yeah, true.
And I think it isn't going to be long before you see governments starting to really crack down on people who abuse social media for their own nefarious, means.
Yeah, there's also...
And the quicker the better, I think. But, governments and police forces and regulators are overstretched everywhere.
Yeah.
They've only got so many resources to look at it. And I'm pleased to see that the social media platforms themselves are now taking action against people who sort of abuse their system, and the fact that they've set it up to create a vision for the world with respect to how they want their social media to be portrayed, to find that their platforms out of Silicon Valley are being contaminated by people who want to do what they do.
I couldn't agree more.
Look, everybody's got that's what the free world is. It's a democracy. Everybody has a right to say whatever they feel, good, bad, or ugly. But you just got to do it in a very respectful, polite way. And the moment you step over that mark, I think that's when the world needs the regulators and the people who own the blog sites need to take action. Yeah,
I agree. I've got just one last question. You're at the Master Investors Show in April on the main stage.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to that. I haven't been on a public stage sort of in the UK talking to shareholders for quite a while. And I'm sort of scratching my head about what I really want to talk about. I mean, I've got so many interesting things happening that, that I'm working with, whether it's selling food to the world from Africa through AfriAg, I'm still involved in the sub-businesses there, even though I'm not on the board. Or social media and the pros and the cons, Cuba, which is obviously in the press, but unfortunately, while it's on ISDX and they don't have a full online trading platform, I think it's very difficult to get even a small percentage of the 1,000 people that will be supposedly sitting in that main conference room, when I give my talk, to actually bother to get on the phone and call a broker, because I think people sort of are out of that. I'm not on the board of LGO Energy. I'd love to have a chat about LGO Energy for 20 minutes, but at this stage I'm not on the board. So I'm sort of debating, how do I entertain 900 to 1,000 people with something interesting for 20 minutes and then a Q&A. But it's one of the biggest investor shows in the UK.
Yep.
I don't know how many thousands of people are turning up. And, I'm pleased to be on the stage. And, you've got Patrick Brearley there from ISDX in the morning. You've got Jim Mellon. And then I think you've got me after lunch. So, I'll be rip-roaring and ready to go with something, quite interesting on one or two or three of those things that I spoke about earlier. Yeah. And the thing is, my life's so fluid that over the course of the next, 3 to 4 weeks between here and the UK Investor Show, Master Investor Show, that, what's actually going to be the most interesting? My gut feeling is Cuba's actually going to be the most interesting in the next, 3 to 4 weeks. And hopefully Patrick can get the ISDX platform going up properly so retail can buy, sell, hold. The blog sites can, praise you or abuse you, and that's up going properly by then. But it's going to be an interesting show, and from what I gather, very well attended.
I was there last year actually, and it's an amazing show, and it's definitely it's the show to be at, I think. And Jim Mellon and Sven, they do a fantastic job with that show, to be honest.
Well, I haven't met Jim yet, and I'm sort of looking forward to it. He's certainly created a lot of very interesting scenarios on the London market. Some more interesting than me, I think. So I'm looking forward to catching up with Jim and chewing the fat on what tickles his fancy and rows his boat. But it'll be interesting, and I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, nice one. Anyway, Dave, you're an absolute gentleman for talking to us today.
No, that's a pleasure, Alex.